Hello, I'm One Nerd, and today I want to quickly go over some Twine stuff again. Display very quickly a Twine project I've just finished off with the Chapbook format, and then take a deeper dive into the actual Twine file itself, and I'll just talk a bit about how I've implemented some of the functionality that I've implemented in this game, Tammi's Tale, which is a short visual novel game submitted for the Sunno Fest 2024 Game Jam. So I'll quickly demo the game, very quickly, just breeze through it, show the basics of how it works, and then I'll go into the Twine file itself and talk a little bit more about how you can achieve certain things within the chapbook format specifically in Twine, but some of it will be general to Twine as well, but more chapbook focused obviously. So I'll just restart this because it's saved where I was last time. So basically you got the interface. The idea of this game is that you this is like a sort of diary that you're keeping as the interface essentially. We've got this as a background image, which is a JPEG. I've optimized it a bit. Chapbook's very useful for the images because it does responsively scale them according to the width of the container, which is this here really. I've also added a custom image for the background. You can, and yeah, obviously later on I'm going to talk about I've implemented custom fonts too for the headings. Okay, so let's go. And then obviously implemented some sound, which you should be able to hear now. So there's a little bit of background music. There's a sort of like background scribbling sound. And you'll also see that there's delays before most of the text that come up. And then obviously like the generic moving from passage to passage. You got the restart there, of course, restarting the game. It's just generic standard chapbook format stuff. So let's go. That gives you an idea what the game is. It's like you've got a few central areas that you can move around and you can make different choices which affect gameplay. There are some mechanics within this game. For example, there's like a money mechanic. There is a books reading mechanic, which I can quickly just show one of those books in the game. Yeah, it's a sleep mechanic, so there's like every time you sleep, the days increase, all that sort of stuff. And I'll show you once we get into the actual Twine file how to achieve that. Like I say, this will be every visual novel game tends to be different when you're creating them. You know, you've got like different, you're measuring different variables really in the game, which will then have different effects with conditional if statements most of the time. Anyway, let's go read a book. So yeah, you can read a few books, and then this also triggers booleans, which state can be changed. So if I just actually leave the city, so this triggers the end game, just the most generic end game you can get, actually leaving the city just without doing anything. I go end, and yeah, you get like a sort of like statistics page at the end of each game session that you do. So you get how much money you made, who you worked for, how many books you read, and if you have any membership of magical parties, because magical groups, because that's a part of the story and the lore of this game basically, is that yeah, you're a magical witch basically. Anyway, I don't want to waste too much time talking about that. You can try it out. It's now live on drnoir.itch.io/Tammi's-Tale. It's a jam game, so once the jam submission window is over, you will be able to rate it as well. So if you could do that, that would be good. Anyway, on to the main subject of the video. So this is the actual Twine file with all the different nodes for and all the different passages all linked together. So that gives you, obviously without you knowing exactly everything that's going on in the story, it gives you a bit of a visual idea of a way that you can organize it, right? So we've got these color-coded nodes. Each node is a passage in the story representing a choice, and obviously an important thing in Chapbook specifically, this is a Chapbook specific thing, are the config variables, which are control the style. Much of the style, I have mixed it a bit here with some custom CSS and using Chapbook styling, but yeah, that is that. So let me talk briefly about these. So make this a bit bigger. I think I can kind of get stuck to that. Can't open it. Okay, just have to reopen it. For some reason, it's crashed. Not sure how that happened. Full screen it. Okay, there we go. So just open that up again. So in the Chapbook format, this is how your passage, like menu items, come up. Tagging is actually really useful. So I've created a few different tags which correspond to different aspects of the story. So they're all color coded as well. So I've got politics, combat, danger, end signifying the end of the game, law, magic, main, sleep, and start. Now this can be just useful for tracking. So for example, start is signified by this blue one. That's why you got that blue there. It's just like a nice visual reminder for being able to track through. One other thing to mention in the Vars section here, which you basically just write it all down, but then you do have to remember to put the two hyphens once you've finished writing all the Vars, essentially. So I'm loading in some assets there, like sounds, for example. Like the pen sound is loaded just right at the start of the game, so I've got that preloading basically. So that's what this is here, sound effect pen.pen.url. Very useful thing to know. You can also change the volumes. You might want different sounds playing at different volumes, for example. One aspect which can be very powerful if you actually use it in combination with other variables are these, they're basically global vars I'm assigning here. So I've got one for example, one of the quests, if you go down a certain path, is to get prepare some flowers for one of the NPCs in the game. So there's a variable called flowers done, which is this one here, right? Which only gets obviously when the state of that variable when you start the game is false, and then it gets triggered to true, and then that creates different texts in the game once that is true. Basically, alive is obviously true, so we've got a state, a variable for the player state, which is are they alive, are they dead? Obviously it's alive, they're true at the start. Books read just starts at 0, so you could also do it for your accounts. Coven book is specifically that should actually be false. I've just fixed the bug live, that's good. So that should actually be false. That is incorrectly declared. Anyway, join coven is another plot thing. Day 1 is obviously for tracking the days, so you start at 1 and then there's a counter that just gets incremented, which I'll show you that later on. You start with 500 money, false is another plot thing. So variables for like you could set them here, especially if you want to show them like I do on an end screen, as I showed before. There's like an end sort of like statistic screen, and these just set generic values basically. Config. So if you want to like change the colors and stuff, you go to build, this is specifically the Chapbook format, I may remind you, but yeah, and you can then play around with all the different settings here. So if I want to make the font to like, I don't know, it's 18 now but 20 or something, and then you just see it update in real time. Change it back to 18, but yeah, so you can experiment with the styling there. This is mostly to do with colors though in this chapbook menu. So I've implemented some custom CSS as well. So I'll talk about that a little bit later because I don't want to overload this too much. But yeah, this is essentially where you change the font colors. Obviously, I've implemented custom fonts. I've done it a way, but yeah. Okay, so if I go back here, and we've got. You can also. There's no custom JavaScript in this game. It is a fairly simple gameplay experience. I do have some custom CSS. Now I'm going to assume that if you don't need to know how to write CSS for Twine, but it can help just to add some additional sheen or polish, I guess. So how I've implemented it, I've imported a custom font because I wanted this stylized Soviet style font, which is that, right? So it's called Minister, Kremlin Minister. So I had to download the actual font file and then do an import with CSS for that. I've also created that backdrop in CSS targeting the ID backdrop. So again, this is actually useful to know. I may as well mention it then. If you do want an image for the background, obviously put the background file in the root folder, so the same folder as the index.html page, or the main page basically for the game. And then you want to just use this bit of CSS background-image colon URL and then the name of the file, and then it will come up, and then you can do various things like background size. It's for cover, contained. There's many different ways that you can do that, but cover's quite a good one because it just means it covers the entire width and the size of the screen, basically 100%. I've also added this here, so this ID page refers to this, so just so that makes sense. Backdrop, and I can even show you on here. Backdrop refers to, I can show you the IDs. So obviously this is going a bit deeper, I've gone a bit ahead of myself, but yeah, if you want to do the custom CSS, that's the backdrop. You can see it there. It says div ID backdrop, and you can see that's where that custom CSS is being applied for the background, and then likewise for the page, and then there you go. You see the associated CSS there. Again, background image URL, background size contain. I've added a border, and I want I've set a font there of Lato. Also worth noting, so these links, which are like the button links basically, I've also styled those with CSS, so you'll see that's basically styled with CSS. Done a bit of custom styling on that, I think. I remember correctly. No, maybe not. Maybe that might be redundant actually. Forget that. But I've also, the only other thing I've done then with custom CSS is a different heading styles. So I've applied the custom font that I imported called Minister. I've simply got the selectors there of H1, H5, H2, H5, etc., which are the different heading sizes. I have missed H6, but it's never used, so it doesn't matter. Just set it to color black and applied that custom font, which I've imported in above. Obviously check that the spelling's right, and then that gives me that stylized heading font, which we see here. So that's that. So that's basically it for the custom styling. It's been 40 minutes, so I'm going to assume that you're somewhat familiar with how to use creating new nodes and passages in Twine. One thing to bear in mind specifically with the chapbook format is you can add this little arrow icon, which makes it into this I like it anyway, like this button style, and then when you have for example a list of options. It just like styles it like that, which I quite like for certain interactions in visual novels or interactive fictions, right? Is it just makes it very obvious where you need to click. I find it more visually appealing. For sound, so how I usually, one thing you have to watch out for with sound is like loads of browsers just basically block autoplaying sound, but until there's an interaction. So to get around that, there's no sound at the start. But then when you click onto basically what is the start of the story, which is this second passage, which is links from the start node, then I trigger this ambient sound. The ambient sound is then loaded in the Vars section again, which is signified by those two dashes or hyphens. You write like sound ambient music URL, and then I've got a specific folder called sound with an MP3 file in there. So I'll show you that here. So this is the actual directory structure. So I've got a folder called sound, 2 sound files in there, which are just MP3 files, which is the sound effect and the background music. And just to make this clear, I'll load that in here. Ambient music, I've called it music. That's what this refers to when I actually trigger it off in the game. So we've got a sound ambient music URL, the actual path to that file relative to the index, the HTML file, a bit of description, which is actually needs something added to it, so I'll just put that. That's like metadata really, but yeah, it helps. And then this is how I'm triggering that ambient sound. So ambient sound, the name, which is referenced here, music, and then the volume of it. And then I also want to trigger the sound effect, which was defined here. So, I mean, I could have defined it right at the start, but I've just done it this way anyway. Because it could have loaded the asset in. And then that triggers also the sound effect of the pen, so the sound effect for pen is triggered on nearly every single passage because it's like a sound effect. Because I've basically implemented delays on nearly all of the paragraph loading. As you can see here, you got after 2 seconds, after 4 seconds, after 6 seconds, after 8 seconds. That then gives you that stacking effect of slowly loading in. And that's relatively simple. You just do brackets after 2 seconds here and that sort of thing. I hope that makes sense. Image loading is pretty easy, so I've got a folder in my directory called images. As well, the artwork goes for the game, so it's all there. And then embed for images within Chapbook specifically is different for other formats, but in Chapbook you do this embed image. Yeah, obviously making sure that you put this brackets in there. Embed image colon and then the path to the file and then the brackets again. And that will make it responsive by default as well, which is very useful. So for example, if I load this, that's the beauty of Chapbook actually as a format. So if I load this on like tablet, you can see on mobile phone everything's resized, does it all for you. You don't have to worry about responsiveness. And then if I also change to like, I don't know, iPad or something, you get different resolutions supported. And the image is just resized accordingly. So then if I go to like iPhone, it resizes again. So you've got all that covered basically, which is useful. Obviously, like when you're on phone, you do lose the background, but there's not really any way of getting around that, to be honest. Pretty much. I mean, you can make it horizontal and you can see it a bit, but again, who plays interactive fiction games on landscape? Unless it's like part of the UI. I mean, it's going to be a lot harder to scroll and read and stuff. It depends on the amount of text, obviously, as well. I mean, it's like, but yeah. God, 20 minutes. So, like I'm trying. I don't want to rush through this too fast, but yeah. What else will I mention? So yeah, as I was mentioning previously, you have Vars, which can then trigger certain text passages. So, for example, this is a good example of that. So, if we go here, there are different options that can be triggered within this game. So, for example, you can sign up for some work. And that has an effect on the type of work you do. So you can either be arranging flowers or basically working in a vegetable production line essentially. So I've just added a conditional there. If worker equals or equals false, this will look very familiar if you are familiar with JavaScript. I'm checking for strict quality there basically. If it's definitely false, then make this passage option or text available to the viewer. If it's true, make this other one visible basically. And then yeah, another option there for money. So if there's a certain amount of money is reached, then this text comes up and you get another option as well basically. So that makes sense. I mean, that's fairly intuitive. You can also you can access that from here. So if you go modifiers, you got if and else too. So if it's a binary and or, which basically just means fork in the road. There's unless, but I don't use that as much. It's a bit of a funny one. After delays, the delays with the transitions to the fading in basically after a certain delay time. Most of the time I'm just going to be using ifs, like, to be honest. It depends on the complexity of your game, obviously. One thing I think that's generally like useful is not to, unless you're building something that's very ambitious, it's like it can get harder to track the more variables you introduce, so you want to make sure that you don't make it too complicated. I mean, it is always like, there is always a balance between not overcomplicating the mechanics. I'll show you an example of the actual end screen. So yeah, that's a good example for the conditionals. So you've got if a condition is met from a certain variable over this value, in this case 50,000, then you're a wealthy person. If you were killed, obviously if alive was false, like I showed before, the alive is initially set to true because you're initially alive, right? Then you were killed, and you get a bit of text about that. So it's like one of the endings basically, you can get killed. And then yeah, I've got the if else demonstrated there. Yeah. I don't think there's much more really to cover. Obviously, like, you can play the game and be interested to see what you think. But this hopefully is a bit of a good introduction to a lot of the functionality and how to actually incorporate that in a Twine Chapbook project. Obviously, like, creativity is the name of the game with Twine and these sorts of simple game engines, especially like visual novels and interactive fictions. So there are other ways I could have done this, of course, and there are varying methods, right? So you'll see, like, in terms of like the node management, there are like sort of central hubs which are defined here. You've got the walk into the flat, as obviously you can just tell visually immediately that that's a very important central hub, which links back to a lot of other things. You got like reading books. You can also arrange this differently, so you can just spread it out. So you can zoom in and out. So for example, I tend to just stick on this one, but yeah, people will definitely, you can get a bit closer there if you want to get even closer. Zoomed in. That's interface though, really. I'm not going to cover the interface stuff too much. I think I'm going to probably leave it there. It's been 20-something minutes. I don't want to ramble on too long. I hope that's been useful. Just trying to think, is there anything else I could just cover? Oh yeah, so like, for example, yeah, I didn't cover this actually. So for example, as I said, when you've got like the initial variables that you set I often set them in the first passage. If you wanted then to change, so that, like I said, there's like a plot in this game where you can take on work that's official, come from like the official Communist Party in this example. Then the initial worker variable is set to false. If you then wanted to set that to true, you just literally assign it like this: worker colon true. Make sure of course you put that there to so that the format knows that you're just affecting variable change there. I'll show the days as well. So for example, when you sleep, obviously you take the initial variable, so in this case day, and then you just add 1 and it'll know that that's what to do. Randoms are fairly simple, so that's occurs a few times in here. I think it's just 1 or twice, but yeah. So there is a random D10. So for example, it's going to be good for like this doesn't really have a combat system, but it has a basic random check, and then so basically Mercer attack, each camel casing, and then random.d10. You can see all this in the documentation as well. And then if that Mercer attack is under a certain value, then one thing happens, else something else happens. And you could obviously do that, so you could literally do 10 of them if you wanted to, or probably 11 actually. Different conditions if you really wanted to make that many. So that's a good way sometimes to do randomized events. It also applies for work, actually one of the work scenarios. So if let me just find that passage and then I'll wrap this up. So where are you? So it's a bit hidden away, this one, for some reason. There we go. So this is like when you do a day of work, basically, if you take on like this assigned work detail. This is a good example of where I've implemented that exact thing I was talking about before, which is essentially like a switch statement or series of if statements. Work day, roll a random d4, adding the money is on the day, of course. But yeah, you got work day 1, something happened, you worked really hard, you get the full amount. You have an average day, you have a bad day, you have a terrible day. So you can just like put different you can just like put different results, different bits of text, and yeah. Though in fact, this could be improved because like I could vary it so that the money, you probably have to like put in a custom JavaScript for that, but you do it so that if there's a conditional, it would then change the amount of money that is applied. I've just left it as a generic one for the minute. This is just like a game jam game, so it's been 2 weeks of just jamming about on it. Anyway, I think I've basically covered everything I need to cover there. One useful thing as well, just to finally, I often find it's just a link. So once you've reached the end of the game, link back to the starting passage, which is this one here, it's just the start. Because then that, as well as the restart button, which you see pretty much all the time, unless you disable it in the bottom right corner, it just helps. It's another way for the player to, so I'll just demonstrate that. So obviously I can restart that there, it's fine, yeah, okay. But then if I want to just leave and end the game, so yeah, then you've got a passage there that links right back to the start of the game again. So I'm back at the start state, right, which I think is often very useful. Okay, I've covered quite a lot there. I hope that's been useful. It's half an hour, oh my god. Like and subscribe if you found that interesting. This channel, basically game dev, web dev stuff, programming, creative coding, that sort of thing. Yeah, thanks.